heart of where innovation, money, and power collide in Silicon Valley and beyond. This is Bloomberg Technology with Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow.
I'm Caroline Hyde at Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York.
And I'm Ed Ludlow in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg Technology.
Coming up, look, Spotify, it slashes its workforce by 17%. It's amid the company's steepest job cuts this year. We'll break down the streaming services push to cut costs and drive profitability.
Plus, the crypto rally gains steam as Bitcoin tops $42,000 for the first time since April of 2022. We'll discuss what it means for the digital currency ecosystem in today's VC Spotlight.
And we sit down with the Oculus creator, Palmer Luckey, as his defense technology startup, Anduril, unveils a tiny, reusable fighter jet to blow up drones. All that and so much more ahead. Let's get into these markets. Look, we are in sell-off mode. We're just hearing from Guy and Alex that basically we're just getting back to the levels that we were at on Thursday. Such has been the drive higher in risk assets of late. We're off by 1.1%. Now we know many just reassessing how much we've run up already, but also really with the direction of travel for the Federal Reserve and a lot of the jobs data that we're getting this week. 2-year yield currently up by some 10 basis points, so clearly seeing a sell-off in bonds and stocks. Bloomberg dollar index on the higher side by some 0.5% after we've seen such weakness in the US dollar so far this year. Let's move on because the strength in the US dollar not outmatching the strength in Bitcoin. And Ed, we're going to dwell on this a little bit later in the show, much more. But the fact that we're now piercing above 42,000 at one point in earlier trading, now at 41,500, let's call it. We know the driving force behind all of this. Will we get a spot Bitcoin ETF come January? Will, of course, the halving process next year drive demand yet further? But ultimately, this is about risk asset demand as well, isn't it?
Yeah, we call it our risk asset of choice. And it's interesting that on days like today, where equities are broadly lower, Bitcoin is higher, but so are crypto-related stocks. And I guess that there are two rationales, right? It's a proxy for Wall Street to get some exposure to cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin without investing in them directly, by investing in stocks that are relevant to it. Or the other way of looking at it, that if the thing that is important to these equities does well, in this case Bitcoin, then they do well as well. And you are seeing some pretty outsized moves. I mean, these are big moves, right, on these single names on a day where equities are lower.
And I think perhaps we've got a little bit used to a lack of volatility, dare we say it, in broader Bitcoin prices. We were used to things flinging about by 10 double-digit percentage points, but on the day, well, we have been only up about 5-6%, but that feels a big move. And I think these numbers, look, we're still way off the $69,000 level that we had in previous highs, but we're back at that level that we saw in April 2022 prior to the Terra Luna debacle. And all of this just slowly rebuilding confidence, really, in the ecosystem.
Yeah, and we've had guests on this show saying $60,000 next year, $100,000 maybe next year. Seeing is believing, I think, when it comes to Bitcoin. But we're excited about 2024. The other top story that we've got to get back to, Caro, is Spotify, reducing its workforce by 17%. That's 1,500 jobs. This is the company's biggest cuts yet this year. They've done 3 trims. I want to bring in Bloomberg's Ashley Carman. Give us the details, Ashley. What did Spotify say about the timing and rationale for cutting 1,500 employees?
Yeah, so today Spotify's CEO Daniel Ek put out a blog post sort of explaining the cuts. He said basically these decisions were going to have to be made possibly over the next couple years, and he decided to just rip the Band-Aid off and cut a bunch of people all at once. He essentially said that yes, they've cut operating costs quite a bit, but not enough, and that they needed more people to go and more people to focus on their core mission, which is building for creators and consumers.
Yeah, I think just realigning the fact that too many people were ultimately building things that weren't core to the ultimate mission of building profitability, of building margin, and that seems to be what analysts like so much at the moment, Ashley. And it's interesting that a lot of them are saying eventually margin is going to be buoyed by what have been some really outsized commitments to the world of, well, podcasting in particular.
Yes, yeah. So the story of Spotify really is that they, since 2019, have committed over $1 billion to the podcast world. They bought studios, they bought creation technology, they bought a hosting service. And really what we've seen over the past year is just a total backtrack on that business. And I imagine as we learn more about today's cuts, we'll hear about how that impacts their podcast business as it is.
You know, it's interesting. Loads of technology companies have gone through this, the micro focus on profit. The other metric you can look at is say, well, actually, Spotify is on track for an astonishingly good year. 100 million new subscribers or users it's going to add based on how it's done so far. What is the overall health score for Spotify, Ashley, based on your reporting?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's very puzzling here, right? Is they've had amazing growth from a monthly average user perspective. They do have more free users than subscription. So that's an issue. You know, they want to be able to monetize those subscriptions more. But broadly speaking, they continue to grow, which is pretty incredible. I think they just have to figure out what is going to be the way that they make more money, because they keep having to pay these music rights holders, which makes a ton of sense. But they also need to find other revenue opportunities. So we've seen price increases. We've seen them cut costs. We've seen them move into podcasting. And then very recently, they moved into audiobooks. So maybe that'll be the magic bullet. I don't know.
And all of this at a time where Daniel Ek does speak about the macro realities as well. He talked about the fact that, look, money's more expensive than it used to be. Borrowing costs have been on the rise. This is perhaps just really trying to, instead of what we started to talk, these micro cuts that are happening at tech companies at the moment, he's just, as you say, ripping the Band-Aid and just showing his intent to still have this year of efficiency, to coin a meta phrase.
Yeah, and I don't know if we noted it at the top, but this is the third round of cuts this year. So right. They did a significant chunk in January. They did another chunk in June, which was primarily the podcast team. And yeah, now here we are with the biggest cut that they've made all year. So overall, over 2,000 employees will have lost their jobs.
Yeah, I like your point on users. I mean, I'm on the premium family monthly subscription, which I pay, and I have some other family members on there which do not pay. But I guess the free user point's big. Bloomberg's Ashley Carman, busy night, early morning for you. Thank you so much. There are more tech layoffs and other stories happening elsewhere. Twilio cutting 5% of its workforce, its third major headcount reduction in order to reach profitable growth. The cuts mostly affected salespeople for Twilio's consumer data platform and contact center software. That's according to a memo from the CEO, Jeff Lawson. The company has shed more than 3,000 workers since September 2022, which is about 1/3 of its total workforce in that time.
It's a cloud computing provider that's among the hottest startups in the AI race. It says it's closed a minority stake sale to investors led by Fidelity. Others including, as you can see, JP Morgan Asset Management. We're also getting Zoom Ventures among them, all participating in the transaction. The value of the company, get this, $7 billion, according to sources. Well, we can get a source very close to the deal now, none other than the CEO of CoreWeave, Mike Intrator. It's great to have you on the show, Mike. And it's an extraordinary story, really, of CoreWeave, going from its origins. Well, you were a commodities trader. You saw the space for crypto. You were doing mining in ETH. And then, of course, you become a specialized cloud AI provider. What makes your offering different from the more general purpose cloud providers out there?
Sure. First of all, thank you very much. It's great to have an opportunity to speak with you. It's obviously a very exciting day over here at CoreWeave, and my whole team is very excited about these transactions as we go into the end of the year. Looking forward to really getting off to next year in the same footing. So to answer your question, CoreWeave is a specialized cloud computing company. And what we mean by that is we've made every decision from the hardware stack all the way through the software stack to really build a cloud that is specialized to address the needs of companies that need massive scale parallelized computing. When we talk about that, we're really talking about the three industries that we address. The first one is media and entertainment. And so if you go to see a Marvel movie, there's a good chance that several of those studios will have rendered their images on our infrastructure. The second one is basic science, synthetic biology. So think of that as like drug discovery and protein folding. And then finally, and most importantly right now, obviously, is the build-out of infrastructure that is very, very appropriate for artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Mike, I keep hearing about CoreWeave. I have done all year long about just the sort of booming growth that you've experienced. I think you started the year disclosing you had 3 data centers online. Now I believe it's somewhere between 14 and 18. how have you been able to move so quickly on the infrastructure side?
Yeah, so, great teams all across our infrastructure, internal to the company, just an incredible coordination, automation to allow us to kind of build and scale that. We also have great relationships up through the supply chains that have been so difficult for everyone to navigate. The support from our partners all through the supply chain has been incredible. And your numbers are correct. We've made a massive push in terms of the number of data centers that we are in. It puts us in a position to be able to serve the largest, most important artificial intelligence models that are being trained, that are being served to the public right now. And it's very exciting. We've got a lot more work to do, but definitely improving and increasing our footprint every day.
One of those partners is NVIDIA. We're just showing some of your key customers on the screen, but NVIDIA is a tech partner as well, right? And my understanding is that you're actually helping them, you yourselves, to build their own next-gen supercomputer. What can you tell us about that project?
So NVIDIA is a wonderful partner of ours. They invested alongside Magnetar and K2 in our B round, which was where we raised $420 million in April of this year. It was a kind of massive step for us as we began to accelerate our growth through the year. And so by having a partner like NVIDIA invest in the company, it made it very clear to all of our partners across the debt space, across the equity space, that they had looked at our infrastructure and were comfortable with the way that we built it in order to deliver the most performant configuration of the accelerated compute that is defined by their GPU.
You've been raising money, whether it be equity or debt, at quite a pace because, of course, what you're doing needs a lot of money. Would you tap the public markets? Would you think about going public as soon as 2024?
So as you said, we really made three different transactions in the capital markets this year. We did the B round early on. That was, as I said, a $421 million raise. We came back and we did a very, very large debt facility that was $2.3 billion that was really dedicated to purchasing the capital-intensive infrastructure that's required. And then this secondary transaction is the final transaction for us for the year. We are not committed or have no real comment around the concept of going into the public markets, other than to say that we are capital-intensive business and that we are going to need to continue to access capital markets in the most efficient way possible. And as far as that goes, all options are absolutely on the table for us as we look into the future.
Mike, quickly, you've built on H100 and DGX, but AMD's coming with MI300. Have you looked at that?
Yeah, so we spend a lot of time researching all of the different silicon alternatives in the market. Right now, our focus is on the H100. I would argue that, as you look across the AI space at large, their focus is on the H100. It's an amazing piece of silicon. It does incredible things in terms of moving the AI space forward. And so it's really been the majority of our effort. But we do monitor all of the different silicon alternatives that are out there that could potentially be integrated into a provider like us.
CoreWeave CEO Mike Intranta, great to catch up with you, selling a minority stake in that company at a big valuation. Thank you. Now, coming up here on Bloomberg Technology, former US Treasury Secretary Larry Summers weighs in on what it means to be a member of OpenAI's newly formed board. We're going to bring you those details next. This is Bloomberg Technology. Okay, time for Talking Tech. And first up, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo says if the US truly wants to stop China from making cutting-edge semiconductors, then her department's going to need more funding. During a defense forum on Saturday, Raimondo also urged American chip companies to prioritize national security over their revenue. And one of the chip-making industry's most valuable suppliers is sinking deeper into debt, despite holding more than 90% share of the silica used to polish silicon wafers. Fuso Chemical, based in Japan, hasn't lifted prices because it fears it would scar its relationships with customers like Samsung, Intel, and Taiwan Semiconductor. Fuso also struggling to make its capex targets. Plus, California's privacy agency has drafted a set of rules that aim to give residents more agency over how their personal data is used by automated tools. If adopted, the proposal would affect how tech companies develop AI, which relies heavily on data to train itself. Board members will discuss the draft on Friday, though enforcement isn't likely to start anytime soon. Caroline.
Let's stick on AI, Ed, because the former US Treasury Secretary, Larry Summers, well, he's hoping to get settled into his new role as a board member of the so-called interim board of OpenAI, of course, the key AI startup. He shared his thoughts on the matter in Bloomberg Television's Wall Street Week with David Weston. Take a listen.
This was something that was extraordinarily important. You know, no one can be certain whether this is a once-a-decade technology, a once-a-half-century technology, a once-a-century technology, a once-a-millennium technology. No one can know that for sure, but it sure looks like it's awfully important to develop rapidly and safely and to disseminate effectively and well. So when I was offered an opportunity to be part of contributing to that and overseeing to make sure that that was effectively done and to do it working with some very great people, I thought it was a real opportunity and I was glad to do it.
I don't want to take anything away from your technological expertise, but what you just said, safely, strikes me as probably part of what you're going to be focused on. And that gets to questions of governance, about how you handle this technology, wherever it's going and however powerful it may be. Do you have an overall sense of what you need to do to govern it to get the safely part right?
You know, David, I've been on the job 2 days, and they're going to send me the onboarding packet for the board on Sunday. So I shouldn't be saying too much at all because I don't know enough. Here's some things I think I know. I think I know that a company like this has to be prepared to cooperate. Doesn't mean always agree with, but cooperate with key government officials on regulatory issues, on national security issues, on development of technology issues. I think I know also, and this is integral to the structure of OpenAI, where the for-profit entity is itself a creature of a not-for-profit entity, that this needs to be a corporation with a conscience, and that we need to be always thinking about the multiple stakeholders in the development of this technology. And as a board member, that will be part of my responsibility, working with other board members to make that certain. You know, my colleague at Harvard, late colleague Ken Galbraith, said that conscience is the knowledge that someone is watching. And I think it's the responsibility for everybody involved in this to be thinking very carefully always about both opportunities and uncertainties, and to make sure that those are balanced in the best way that's possible.
That was former US Treasury Secretary Larry Summers sitting down with Bloomberg's David Weston. We should also note that Larry Summers is a Harvard University professor and a paid contributor to Bloomberg TV and Wall Street Week. Now, as we keep an eye on the situation with the Israel-Hamas war, the situation is also one that's been hard to manage online. TikTok is having a hard time moderating deepfake videos of Hamas victims and other private citizens, even though these videos violate their content moderation policies, which ban AI-generated videos of private citizens and minors. And yet, these videos are racking up thousands to millions of views. I want to bring in Bloomberg's Alex Barinka, who's been writing about this morning on Bloomberg. That is the struggle. They're in contravention of the policy, but they're being seen by millions, Alex.
Absolutely, Ed. In the days after the October 7th attack by Hamas in Israel on that music festival, I was looking on the app for some of the names of some of the believed victims, and some of the top videos were AI-generated videos that purported to and showed folks like Shani Luke, the 22-year-old, now known to be dead German-Israeli woman, who you saw her face. You saw an image like her standing in front of folks in military garb, holding guns, talking about her thoughts on the attack, talking about her mother. But this was not, in fact, Shani Luke. This was a digital resurrection, as experts call it, where somebody went online, used one of these increasingly inexpensive tools to take some photos of her from the internet and turn it into an AI-generated video. Now, these videos are against the content guidelines of TikTok. Private citizens and minors are not allowed to be portrayed in what TikTok calls synthetic media, which includes AI videos. But that video racked up 7 million views alone before I sent it to TikTok, and they took it down. There are dozens of additional videos like this portraying both victims of Hamas, portraying 3-year-old murder victims in a child's voice, talking about how they died and the injuries they sustained. And these videos are live and, again, racking up thousands to millions of views and sometimes going viral. So this is just an indicator to me of this kind of early wave of where AI is hitting real people, and in particular people who, since they are deceased, cannot actually come in and defend themselves when they see their likeness out there on social media.
So deeply emotive, Alex. And just to say what TikTok has indeed come back, of course, parent company ByteDance saying, like other platforms, TikTok continues to invest in detection, in transparency, and in industry partnerships to address this rapidly evolving technology. But therein lies the issue. It is a rapidly evolving technology. What do you think more could be done internally by TikTok and indeed the other key social media players out here?
They've already rolled out tools to ask users to opt in to label AI on videos that use AI, but most of these videos, Caroline, that I came across didn't have that label. So it's clear they need to be doing more behind the scenes with their incredibly powerful algorithms, with their human moderators, to be picking up on this stuff. But when I talk to experts, they're already raising a flag, not just in these digital resurrections, but also looking forward to things like the election. Right now, a lot of these videos have this kind of uncanny valley weird feel. They're going to get more realistic, and the apps are going to need to do more to be able to detect them.
Alex Barinka, thank you so much for bringing us the story. From New York and San Francisco, this is Bloomberg Technology.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. Ed Ludlow here in San Francisco.
Caroline Hyde in New York. Let's have a quick check on these markets, because actually we're having the biggest sell-off in indeed the Nasdaq 100 in more than a month now. October 26th we're seeing it. We're off by more than a percentage point. Now, is this profit taking after the run-up that we've had, of course, throughout the month of November? Is it a little bit of caution as perhaps we're baking a little bit too much dovishness into a Federal Reserve and the direction of travel for bonds? But nevertheless, a sell-off in stocks and a sell-off in bonds as well, the 2-year yield spiking as well. I'm looking, though, at, in spite of this sell-off in risk assets, one stands out. Bitcoin actually powering up. We're up at one point in excess of $42,000, and we're still on the higher side despite a stronger US dollar today. You know the driving forces. We're still talking about spot Bitcoin ETF. Will that be signed off in January? Will we get, of course, well, we know the halving is going to come next year, but what will macro policy mean for Bitcoin into 2024? So still on the higher side. Let's look at some of the individual movers today. I'm having a quick look at Uber because, well, maybe I'll be including the S&P 500. That's, of course, what's driving it higher, up some 5% on the day. But actually, one of the only fields of green other than crypto stocks and Uber. Let's go to some of the losers. Interestingly, some inside selling happening in NVIDIA in November. In fact, 370,000 shares were either sold or filed to be sold by internal candidates and, of course, executives at the company. So we currently see that off by about 2.4% after, of course, a massive run for 2023. And indeed, Meta, same, that one, of course, for Mark Zuckerberg himself. First time in a couple of years, Ed, that he's actually selling his own company's shares, currently off by 1.8%, as you can see. But we've got a key company to be talking about next.
Yep, and we're going private this time. Anduril is out with a new autonomous air vehicle. Roadrunner is akin to a mini reusable fighter jet that blows up drones. And the startup says the US will deploy it in the field next year. Delighted to say joining us now is Anduril founder Palmer Luckey down in Costa Mesa, California. We just showed images of it, but from a technology perspective, Palmer, you've been working on this in secret and stealth for a couple of years. What is new here? What is the technology at play?
Well, Roadrunner is an AI-piloted autonomous air vehicle. It's got a lot of cool features. It's powered by 2 twin turbojet thrust-vectored engines. It's very, very fast, carries a significant payload. It's very maneuverable. But the really cool thing about it is that it can be reused. It's actually a vertical takeoff and landing vehicle. And that means that with certain payloads, you can go out there, perform the mission, come back, re-land, and then refuel, rearm, and use it again. With other payloads, let's say a one-way warhead to go up against a large aircraft, I can send a whole swarm of Roadrunners out there, and only the ones that actually engage the target are consumed. Everyone else can come home, and that allows you to have much greater effective magazine depth and to use these things in a way that you can't use traditional one-way missiles, where once you launch it, it's gone, whether you launch a bunch of them or one of them.
Palmer, we share with our audience at the top of this segment, Ashley Vance wrote about it in his story, that the US plans to put this to deployment next year, right? But so much of the news flow around drones has been in the context of the war in Ukraine. You know, drones are a key strategy for both sides, it seems. Do you see Roadrunner being deployed in Ukraine in the near term? What kind of talks have you had around that?
Well, I'll tell you this. I see it in my mind's eye. But whether it goes there isn't up to me. It's up to a bunch of people in the U.S. government. You know, the foreign military sales process, the transfer process is government-driven rather than company-driven the vast majority of the time. And we've been in Ukraine since the second week of the war, not just with our products, but also sending people over there. I actually was in Kyiv to meet with Zelensky for the second time. I met with him ahead of the war because he was interested in purchasing our technology to help secure their eastern border. Unfortunately, that wasn't something we were able to make happen because of those restrictions that I mentioned earlier. And so it's certainly something that I would love to see personally.
What about demand from Europe in and of itself, Palmer?
So, I mean, we have a lot of European customers, and we do a lot of work in particular with the United Kingdom and the UK Royal Marines especially. But, you know, there's a little bit of a tricky dynamic with some European countries. Some European countries really see their defense apparatus as a way to run a jobs program, and they are forcing us, companies like Anduril, to compete with their own domestic capabilities. It might not be as advanced, might be years behind, it might be more expensive, but it's pretty hard for them to get over the fact that they would be dropping that internal program to buy something from an American company. It's a difficult pill to swallow for some of these countries, especially ones that do have what anyone would consider a pretty strong defense industry of their own.
One country that has a strong defense industry of their own is China. And you've been outspoken on this. We've heard, of course, not only about China's strength in defense, but also their strength in AI. And of course, you're twinning the two here. I'm interested as to how much those conversations surrounding Taiwan, the concerns there, are building, and whether or not it's actually something that you are having conversations with the DoD about.
I mean, it's all about that. Everyone is talking about making sure that the capabilities that we're building today are ready to go for a fight in the Pacific in 2027 or earlier, because that is the latest that we see China trying to launch an offensive. For a variety of reasons, that's the timing for some kind of action against Taiwan, which is critical to our economy. There's a lot of places around the world that we call partners. There's a lot of places around the world that we say are important to our interests. Taiwan and their semiconductor industry is really about as important as it gets, especially for such a small country so close to China. The good news is I think people are recognizing this threat. Big tech companies years ago thought that China was someone that was going to be a huge growth market for them. They thought they were going to get in and sell them social media, sell them services. And I think people are starting to realize that that's not what's happening. They're coming here and they're eating our lunch. And that is, I think, positive for tech companies' decision to start working with the DoD again.
Palmer, there's an intense interest, in Anduril. People don't actually know that much about the company. So if we take the kind of Taiwan case study, Roadrunner aside, what are the products and technologies that you can offer that you would deploy in a hypothetical scenario like that?
Well, our core product is something called Lattice AI. It's kind of the AI engine that powers all of our products. We actually have more people at Anduril working on software than hardware, even though we have over a dozen hardware products. And that's because Lattice is something our software investment is something that can reach across all these systems and a lot of external systems. Lattice AI is integrated with more third-party products than Anduril-made products even. So we make loitering munitions like the Altius line. We make autonomous underwater vehicles like the Dive submarine. We make counter-UAS systems, electronic warfare systems, surveillance systems, tactical UAS systems like the Ghost helicopter drone. We've got a lot of things that could make a really big difference. And again, everything that we're doing and most of what the DoD is doing is preparing for a conflict with a great power like China in the Pacific on a near-term time frame. Anything that we make that is not going to be ready to go into that type of fight, whether it's a blockade or a real invasion, is not something that I think is particularly relevant or worth heavy investment.
Palmer, when I posted on social media you were coming on the show, I guess the most common question from the audience was about manufacturing. You know, if you take Roadrunner as an example, they know it's a cutting-edge technology, but they actually want to know more about how you scale the output of that product.
Well, there's a few things that go into that. First of all, Anduril is a defense products company more than a defense contractor. We use our own money to decide what to build, how to build it, and then we build it and sell it when it's done. And that's very different than companies that get paid more when they have, let's say, an inefficient manufacturing process or a longer manufacturing process because they're on a cost-plus contract. And our head of manufacturing comes from Tesla, where he scaled several lines to very, very large numbers of vehicles. We have a lot of other people who have experience making consumer electronics on a very tight schedule. We've done 5 new revisions of Sentry Tower, 4 new revisions of our Ghost drone in just 5 or 6 years. And so we're on more of a consumer electronics manufacturing and iteration cycle than any traditional defense company would be. And look, my previous company was Oculus VR. I started that when I was 19 years old, living in a camper trailer, sold it to Facebook for a few $1 billion, was there for a few years before getting fired. But while I was there, we made millions of virtual reality headsets in China. I know how China does things. I know how these things can be done, and I'm trying to bring a little bit of that Chinese energy here to U.S. manufacturing, absent all the stuff that I hate about China.
Interesting perspective on what you can learn, perhaps, even though you dislike parts of what's evident. And Palmer, to that point, I mean, everyone's currently hand-wringing about artificial intelligence, US versus China, China versus everyone. I mean, you've just been in the UK. I mean, just at least saying that you've been building relationships there. And we just think about the UK AI Summit, where, what was it, 31 countries signed up to some sort of guardrails when it comes to, well, the acceleration of deployment of AI in the military. What do you make of these moves to putting guardrails in artificial intelligence's use within military?
A lot of these are decades behind. The U.S. government has been thinking about these things literally for decades. It really bothers me when people say, oh man, we need to come up with rules that tell the DoD what to do about AI. I mean, they haven't been thinking about these things. They don't understand how important autonomous weapons can be. What are you talking about? The U.S. government's been deploying autonomous weapons like radar-seeking missiles and missiles that can differentiate between targets for decades now. Look at something like a CRAM or a CWIS, the automated guns that are protecting our bases and our ships from incoming mortar fire, incoming artillery fire, incoming missile and rocket fire. Those are autonomous weapons. They're making decisions about what to shoot down and what to not without a person manually deciding what to do beyond deciding to turn on the system and allow it to engage targets, period. So the U.S. government has very strong doctrine around this that really boils down to making sure a human is always responsible for any decision. And that doesn't mean that the person's responsible for pulling the trigger. I hate this idea too. People say, well, can't you agree that an AI should never be able to decide when to pull the trigger? And I don't agree with that because I don't think there's any moral high ground in making, let's say, a landmine that can't tell the difference between a school bus full of children and a Russian tank column. I think that it is good for it to be able to decide when to pull the trigger as long as a person is taking responsibility for that employment and whatever goes wrong in the end. And so I'd say a lot of this is performative. There are people who have never thought about AI, never thought about weapons until very recently, and they're now declaring themselves to be AI safety experts. And they are decades behind the people who have actually been working on autonomous weapons policy and ethics and guidelines. I think the United States is clearly far and away the leader in this space.
Palmer, I just wanted to point out, when I put on social media coming on the show, of course, there are a body of people out there that don't agree with the use of any technology in the context of war because they don't want to have any consideration of war, right? They believe in peace, frankly. It would be remiss of me not to ask you as well about Oculus. You mentioned it in your prior answer. I think we're almost at the 10-year anniversary of then Facebook acquiring then your company, Oculus. over the last 10 years, where have we landed in VR and AR? This year we had MetaQuest 3, we had Vision Pro from Apple. Just give me your assessment of the technology field for headsets.
Well, on the people who think that we shouldn't be using tech in any of this stuff, I'd say let's arm NATO with sticks and stones and water guns and see how that goes for you guys. As far as VR, I'm really excited with how it's going. I am happy to see a lot of my deeply held technical beliefs playing out in the market. One example is the Apple Vision Pro being kind of an augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality combo headset that is doing full reprojection of the world, where it's capturing the world using sensors and then using all new photons to project into your eyes, rather than an optically transparent AR system that a lot of people were trying to build over the last decade. I've always been on the hard AR full reprojection side. Happy to see that kind of panning out with Apple. I've used the new Apple headset. It's amazing. Probably the best accomplishment that I've done on the VR side was making sure that VR came back from the dead. It is now something that other people are working on, so that for the rest of my life, I'm going to be able to go out and buy really nice virtual reality headsets without having to do it myself, which is what I was doing when I was 15 and 16 starting Oculus.
Anduril founder Palmer Luckey, good to catch up. Good to have you with us here on Bloomberg Technology. Thank you for your time.
Of course.
So coming up on the show, the crypto rally gathers steam as Bitcoin tops $42,000 US. We're going to keep the conversation going and discuss investing in the digital currency ecosystem more broadly. That's the VC Spotlight next. This is Bloomberg Technology.
Let's talk crypto for a moment, because Bitcoin, if you hadn't noticed, has just surged past $42,000 again, extending the largest digital tokens rally to more than 150% so far this year, far outpacing stocks and other risk assets. For today's VC Spotlight, look, we're going to be investing and looking at the turn of digital currency ecosystem and the startups within it. Morgan Bell is with us, NFX general partner. You invest in a whole broad remit of companies, but what we love is your background and the fact that you were there building one of the first ever stable coins with Libra, and as part of Facebook, you of course invest in companies such as Ramp, which is about fiat into crypto. This exuberance around Bitcoin seems to be about institutional access, whether or not we get a spot Bitcoin ETF. Where do you think that really works for the ecosystem at large?
Thank you again for having me. So seeing this turn is exciting, although I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that there have been several, like Schrodinger's cats in crypto. Like, is it dead? Is it alive? And one of those has been the Bitcoin ETF. Like, is it dead? Is it alive? And I think we're turning a corner, as I knock on all of the wood, that it might finally actually be happening, which would be huge, if not the largest impact that could be had on institutional adoption. And the second Schrodinger's cat was Binance. Like, people were worried about Binance, what was there, what wasn't there, what was going to happen, what wasn't going to happen. And I think what we saw happen a few weeks ago was like minimal impact on the space. So I think so those are two huge unknowns that I think are now becoming known in a positive way. So that's exciting for the space.
Morgan, earlier in the show, Caroline and I were talking about how, when Bitcoin goes up, publicly traded crypto-related stocks also go up, either because it's like a proxy for exposure if you're not invested in a digital currency, or it's a logic where, well, if Bitcoin's doing well, that's the thing that underpins all of those companies, so they do well as well. Spin that forward to the VC context. Is Bitcoin being up good for you when you decide, okay, I'm going to invest here, or there?
I like to think that I stay sober enough that it doesn't matter, but in reality, it probably does affect mine and others' psyches. I think I've said this on the show before, but for me, there's always three questions, which is, one, is this company solving a problem for anyone? Two, is anyone using this thing? And three, is this product or company making money or has any potential to make money? And when you look at the history of crypto and crypto startups and blockchain companies, there's very few that actually check all three of those boxes, let alone one or two. And Bitcoin is one of the few use cases that is, checks all of those boxes and is real, and is definitely a case study for potentially other investments. But at the seed stage, I try to not look at the price of Bitcoin when
what you look at is probably the general energy of building in the seed stage right now. And to that end, amid what has been termed yet another crypto winter, has the building still been going? Have there been problems that are being solved in this time where we could stop just talking about prices and actually look at what fundamentally is being built?
Building is still going. When the market was nuts, you had what my partner James calls the fruit flies coming in. So the founders who thought it was just like, the sexiest accessory to have a crypto company and thought overnight they would be worth a lot on paper. And what the market cooling down did is it filtered those founders out. So now you really only have founders coming in who really, really care or who actually have a problem to solve. So in a weird way, the bear market's very nice because it automatically applies a filter, at least to the top of the funnel of startups, that isn't necessarily there in a bull market.
Morgan, bigger picture, we've had a lot of guests on the show that criticize the US as a regulatory environment or a market environment to foster the underlying technology, let's say blockchain in this instance. Your view on that?
I am proud to be an American. However, I do wish that crypto regulation was a bit more founder-friendly than it currently is. To bring back my Schrodinger's cat analogy, which I think still applies here, there are a lot of unknowns or fears or concerns about which way various regulatory bodies can go on various regulatory topics in crypto that are scaring founders away from starting companies in the US. And if there was more clarity in one direction or another, that would limit the amount of guessing or fear that was required to start a company. I think that would be a lot more conducive to founders, specifically starting companies in this space in the United States.
Morgan Bella, NFX General Partner. We always enjoy having you on the show. The Schrodinger's cat analogy. Let's see if it gets traction. We'll see.
I'm a dog person, by the way. But.
Oh, I know. I've met, as you know, I've met your dog, which is always at your side. But we're out of time for today. Thank you. Okay, Apple's long-anticipated breakup with its main financial services partner, Goldman Sachs, is underway, with the iPhone maker offering the bank a path out of their deal. But who might replace Goldman is the focus of this week's Power On column. And Bloomberg's Mark Gurman joins me here in San Francisco. You have a thesis. Chase, outline it.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. We've heard about Citibank, we've heard about American Express, but I think Chase is absolutely the most likely company to take over for Goldman Sachs in terms of the Apple Card partnership. Chase has a lot going for it. It makes a ton of money. So it has the cash balance, it has the management, it has the reserves to take on a partnership that may not be entirely lucrative at the get-go. It does have time to sort of bake into its financials that this is going to be a long-term strategy and partnership. Goldman, as you know, lost a couple $2 billion, maybe a little bit more than that on this. They couldn't really sustain it. Chase probably could. The other thing is Apple and Chase, most people don't know, have a long-term relationship. Chase is one of the biggest partners for credit card transactions in the App Store, Apple Online Services, Apple's retail stores, online stores, and Apple probably gets a better rate, right, because of that deal with Chase and how much Chase credit card usage there is. And there's all sorts of stuff behind the scenes, storing Apple's cash balance, so that long-term relationship means they're primed for a bigger expansion.
It was a great write-up. I urge people to go watch. Also learned that, well, Steve Scurry's off playing golf with Eddie Q sometimes. Mark Kerman, always with the facts. We thank you. Meanwhile, that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology.
Check out the pod, Apple, Spotify, Heart, and on Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology.